Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Manning Up on Real Estate podcast. This is your podcast for local news, strategies, and interviews for the real estate market of Greater Vancouver. And I'm your host, Cameron Manning. All right, so for episode 5 today, we're going to be talking all about the attack on affordability. Now, this has been a very hot topic, especially over the last 3 years. The reason is because we've been getting out of a very hot market. The prices have been going up, and of course, with the median income not moving and prices going up, people are starting to say that Vancouver is unaffordable. People are not able to afford to live here, not able to buy. So it's creating a big controversy. I see tons of articles almost every day coming out on why it is that Vancouver is no longer affordable for the average person and how people are not going to be able to move into Vancouver's region. And of course, in the last 3 years, there's been a lot of pointing fingers at different parties as to why there's unaffordability. There was the shadow flippers, there's the foreign buyers, developers are greedy, even the realtors were causing the market to go up. So we're going to be kind of talking a little bit about all those different parties and maybe why they aren't necessarily fully to blame for the attack on affordability. And I'm going to be pointing a finger. Now, this is, of course, my own humble opinion, but I'm going to be pointing my finger at someone else that I think might be causing a little bit of this unaffordable crisis that we have here in the Lower Mainland. So again, we're talking affordability in the Lower Mainland here. This has been honestly a conversation that's been happening for a long time. Vancouver's always been kind of pegged as unaffordable from the average perspective. But of course, coming out of a very hot market where we've seen prices just absolutely, in some cases, doubling over 2 years, we're seeing that the affordability quote-unquote crisis is becoming even bigger than it ever was before. And of course, in the last 3 years, there's been a lot of different people who've been blamed for the unaffordability. The media has always been looking for scapegoats. Who is it to blame right now? And in fact, I'm just looking at an article right now that was put out 2 days ago as of recording this. So this was September 12th. It came out from the New Westminster Record. It's an interesting article here where it shows an infographic with the average house of a different average house price and the different income required to be able to qualify to buy that house. So such as looking at, Burnaby East here, talking about the average house price being $1.269 million, and the income required to buy that property is $176,000. So again, a lot of times when we hear the affordability issue, this is an article that kind of sums it up for me. When we're talking unaffordability, most times it's talking about the single family home. You don't tend to see now granted, I will say that the condo and townhouse market have definitely gone up as well, and they've kind of shortened the gap as it was. But again, when you see and hear a lot of the unaffordability crisis talk, it's normally geared towards single detached homes. They don't tend to talk too much about condos or townhouses in a lot of these articles because, again, those are still in a lot of ways affordable for the average person. But again, we're not going to talk too much about that. We're going to talk actually who is it to blame for some of this unaffordability? Again, I don't think there's any one person because at the end of the day, the market determines affordability. We had a very hot market with very, very low inventory and very high demand. So basic economics dictates that if you have high demand and low inventory, prices are going to go up. Now, as of right now, our inventory has increased and our demand has slowed down. So we could maybe see that there might be a slide in prices coming in the next little while. Maybe I don't anticipate a lot because there's still a lot of demand in the area. But we're definitely seeing the demand matching the supply now. So more of a balanced market. So again, who's to blame for this unaffordability? When you look back over the last 3 years, there's a lot of people that were having their fingers pointed at them saying, you're the reason why the average person can't afford a house in the Greater Vancouver market. A lot of them were the foreign buyers coming in. Now, granted, foreign buyers are always going to be coming in, and it's an interesting topic when we talk about foreign buyers, because at the end of the day, we want to show that Canada, and in fact Vancouver itself, should be a safe place for people who want to come in and put their money. But at the same time, the government and the media and everyone else started blaming the foreign buyers for the increased prices. Now, definitely it added to the demand. I will not deny that. But again, it goes down to basic economics, supply and demand. So we had an increase in demand. Then, of course, there's those evil shadow flippers. Now, that became a huge topic item for a while there. And it ended up being really that it was a small segment of realtors that were doing this very unscrupulous act. But, I mean, it became such a big topic item that, different rules had changed with allowing assignments and things like that to be able to stop people from doing these shadow flippings. And again, it was just another, let's point fingers. You guys are the ones who caused the market to go up. it was not a huge amount of properties that were going through this, and it wasn't a huge segment of people that were doing this. It was really coming out from one area and one set of individuals that were doing these types of flips. Of course, developers always have fingers pointed at them. Realtors always, for whatever reason, people like to blame realtors, though we don't actually make the market. We interpret the market, and we help to guide our buyers and sellers to make the right decisions in the markets. We always get kind of blamed that, oh, well, because, we're representing both buyers and sellers and all these different things, that maybe we're to blame for the increased cost of housing. And again, there's a lot of people, if you look back over the last 3 years, there's been a lot of blame being placed. But at the end of the day, it comes down to basic economics again, supply and demand. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about supply and demand over this next podcast. But I do want to talk a little bit about one party that I don't think has had this spotlight shining on them too much for what they have done to cause a slowdown or create unaffordability in our market. And that's the government. And it's the government at all levels. I was reading an article the other day that I posted on my YouTube channel, and it talked about how real estate at all levels are addicted to real estate because of the taxes that they can charge. And at the end of the day, when you have a hot market, they try to find quote-unquote ways to slow down the market. And typically what that means is by making it more unaffordable, getting less people to buy, and that's through different taxes or different other systems that they put in place. So I just want to run through a list. I've got about 8 or 9 different changes that came out over the last 3 years that in a way has created a bit of a stress on the market in terms of affordability. So the first and foremost, back in 2017, when the foreign buyers were the ones that were being targeted as the reason why our market was going so hot, we came out with the foreign buyers tax. This was a 15% extra property transfer tax if you were not a resident of Canada. And when it was put into place, it was retroactive. So any properties that were currently under contract and closing after the time it came into place were affected by this tax. Now, again, it was, in my opinion, rolled out really the wrong way. And it's a big tax that, of course, when you look at it from the outside, people are going to sit there and be like, well, why would I pay that extra tax? I don't want to pay that. Why would I be closing on this? So there was fear of a lot of people walking away from sales. And that definitely happened over the time. But in reality, people who are looking to Canada to place their money are looking at it from a safe haven. So again, in my opinion, if they're really concerned about getting their money out and getting it into the Vancouver market, well, it's a cost of doing business. Now, of course, since we've got a new government in place, they're trying to, again, try to stop the foreign buyers from coming in. They've increased the foreign buyers tax from 15 to 20%, and they've increased the area in which it covers. So at the time when it first came into play, it was for the greater Vancouver market. Now it's including Fraser Valley, parts of the island, out into the interior. So again, this is them trying to place blame on another party for a lack of inventory and increasing taxes. So now all of a sudden we don't necessarily have the buyers maybe coming in, especially from those areas, maybe not so much from the one market they were trying to target, but it definitely affects people from, let's say, the United States coming up. Now, right now, with our dollar being where it's at, there's a lot of opportunity for jobs in the greater Vancouver market, especially in certain areas like film. A colleague of mine, he's in the film industry, and he was telling me that they're still screaming for jobs. There's so much filming going on up here because, again, from the film company's perspective, we're a lot cheaper to be able to film up here because, their dollar goes a lot further up in Canada. So those foreign buyers taxes definitely affect if you've got someone who's coming up here quite regularly and maybe they're thinking about moving to Canada. They can't just buy a home now up here and get prepared to move up to Canada. It's going to cost them that extra 15%, or in this case now 20% foreign buyers tax, because they're not a resident or a permanent resident of Canada. So they're going to have to come up here and rent first to be able to then get their permanent residency for them to buy. So it's creating a lot longer a process. And again, when they're renting, maybe they've got the capacity to buy right now, but now they have to rent because they can't afford that extra 20% tax. And they're now pouring their money out in rent if they could potentially buy right away. Another huge one that came up, now this was more of a federal, this was a blanket across Canada, which is kind of interesting because it was in response to the two hot markets, Toronto and Vancouver, predominantly, but of course now the rest of Canada is being hammered with this one, and that's the stress test. A stress test originally rolled out at first to insured mortgages, so that's anyone putting less than 20% down. And that was in an effort to say, okay, well, there's a chance that interest rates are going to start rising. We want to make sure that we're protecting the citizens from these rising interest rates, that if we qualify them at a higher rate and it's gonna drop their buying power, then we know if interest rates go up, they'll still be able to qualify and afford it. So in theory, I mean, it makes sense, but at the same time, it's a huge gap between where they're doing the stress test to where people are actually getting interest rates. Then a little later on, they actually broadened it to all mortgages that are conventional or insured. So if you've got more than 20% down, you're also having to go through the stress test. So what this means for a family is, if you were able to afford maybe a house at the time before the stress test came in, now suddenly with this stress test, you're losing your buying power now based on what your income is and based against that interest rate. So maybe now you can't quite afford a house. Now you got to go to a townhouse, or maybe from a townhouse to a condo. Or those people who are just about getting into the market might not be able to get into the market now because they don't qualify at this increased rate. So as of right now, one of the articles I was reading, it's either 2%, whatever the current, it's an extra 2% on top of the prime rate, or 5.14%, whichever is higher. So again, if prime rate continues to go up, that means the interest rate people are having to qualify for is going to be much higher than 5%. And again, they're still locking in rates though at like 3.5, 3.7. So it's an interesting attack that they did in the affordability standpoint. So it's definitely forced a lot of people down in what they can afford, or maybe out of the market altogether. Now, running into a few more taxes that are either proposed or have been put into effect. Vancouver itself, and again, we're talking government on all levels are addicted to taxes. In response to, quote unquote, the foreign buyers again, Vancouver put into the empty homes tax. So they actually started doing extra taxes for properties that are, quote unquote, sitting vacant for extended periods of time. That tax came into the effect of 1% of the property's taxable value. So basically, residents now have to declare that someone lives in that home, whether it's tenant occupied or owner occupied, saying that this home is not a vacant home to avoid getting this extra tax put on top of them. Now, in a way, I do understand that the city of Vancouver is hoping that by adding this tax, less people will leave homes vacant and actually rent them out and, help stem the rental crisis. But again, it's not, in my opinion, the right option. They're just, again, throwing money, making things less affordable for people. And of course, they've also came out with the school tax. Now, this one I don't believe has gone through yet, but there's been a lot of controversy on it. But basically, the school tax is saying that if you have a home worth over $3 million, we're going to add an extra 0.2% tax onto your property. And if it's over $4 million, then it's going to be 0.4%. So this one's an interesting one. I was reading some articles on this. With our runaway market that we have, the crazy hot market, property values have definitely gone up. Now, just because you have a home that's worth $3 million doesn't mean you're a multimillionaire. Maybe it means that you bought your home and you've lived in it for the last 30 years, and maybe you bought it for $100,000, and at the time, maybe that was expensive. But you were smart, you paid down your mortgage, and now you're sitting with a home worth $3 million. That's awesome. But at the same time, that $3 million is not accessible to you. So now these, potentially retirees are living on their pension. They're living in their homes. They're still the homes that they grew, raised their kids in. And suddenly they're getting hit with this extra tax that they have to pay just because their home's worth more. Don't really understand that. So that could be the difference between someone being able to afford to continue to live in their home that they've raised their kids in, or having to sell it just because they can't afford the tax on their pensions. Again, just because you have a $3 million home doesn't mean you have $3 million in the bank. That equity is not being touched until you either sell the property or pull it out of a refinance or a home equity line of credit. A few other things that have changed over the last little while. Obviously, we talked a little bit about ending the assignments. Again, this was in response to the small group of people doing shadow flipping. So if you flip a contract now, all of those profits go back to the seller if you're flipping it, unless you've got either written permission. There's several other levels of disclosures that you have to go through now to be able to do these assignments. So it's still possible, but again, they were trying to change the way it was being done. So again, attacking a small group of people, punishing a large group of people for what a small group of people had done. As well, they changed recently for the realtors. We no longer can do what's called a limited dual agency, where we represent both buyers and sellers. This is again in regards to the runaway market. People were thinking realtors were not representing the best interests of the consumers, and by representing both parties, we're not being neutral enough. Now, in some cases, sometimes that's the only way to get a property sold. And in most cases, when a seller is hiring you to sell their home, they're hiring you to find them a buyer. So this has made it a little bit more difficult from the realtors, and I think that has also caused a little bit of a slowdown because realtors are still adjusting to how to operate within these new rules. We talked about it on a previous podcast where I still think there's opportunity through that adversity if you know how to take advantage of it. But again, it does create that level of, okay, what do we do now? We don't know how to move in this realm. When the realtors slow down on their volume, they're not pushing their sellers as much, which again creates a bit of a slowdown in the market. We also saw recently, and this one's been a big effect for landlords, so we're kind of getting off of the train of the affordability for housing and talking a little bit about the rental crisis that we have. But they recently changed that. It's if you're going to be doing renovations to a property, it's now a 4-month notice to evict. And they've changed the definitions on what is a major renovation, as well as if you're caught, let's say you quote-unquote renovict someone, so you evict them for the purpose of renos and you do a very light reno, or you don't reno at all, or whatever the case might be, it's not up to the standard, that tenant is now entitled to 12 months of whatever their rent was in compensation if you're caught doing that. So again, this is now turned a lot of, in my opinion, landlords off. You used to have landlords who are saying, I'm not going to be investing in this market because I don't want to be dealing with the current tenancy laws, which in my opinion is going to create more pressure on the rental because we still got lots of people moving into the region. And if we have less investors buying rental properties, we're going to have a continued increased vacancy, which is going to continue to put pressure on rental properties. So I don't think necessarily solving the issue here. Again, it's a very short-sighted. They're trying to appease one party without looking at both parties involved. And one of the final ones I want to talk about here is building taxes. Now, this is again the article that I shared on my YouTube channel on my last upload there. But the article states that in Vancouver specifically, up to 20% of a new condo's cost for the buyer is in taxes. There's different, there's development permit taxes, there's property transfer tax, they're getting hit with the empty homes tax, different things like this. So at the end of the day, with all of these taxes being incurred by the developer, the end thing is they're passing it down to the next buyer because that's all a cost of doing business. To be able to break even or make a profit, because that's what developers are doing. I mean, they're developing to make a profit. It's a business. You've got that being passed down onto the buyer. So if you've got a $400,000 condo that you're looking at, nearly $100,000 of that is coming from the fact that the developer has been taxed multiple different times by the city to be able to build and provide housing. So again, we talk about how the government at all levels are addicted to real estate because of the taxes they can incur. So when I sit there and I hear about the unaffordability and all the different parties to blame, we see the articles come out, we see the different changes the government's doing, but nobody's really pointing a finger necessarily at the governments, and the governments at all levels again, saying, well, maybe what you're doing is causing some of the unaffordability in the Vancouver market as well. It's not always just one party, and it's not always just consumers that are creating it. Now, obviously, when demand increases, property values are going to increase. And as demand increases and supply is not maintaining, people get nervous and they don't want to sell, creating more pressure on the housing. It's putting more pressure on the housing prices because, again, I had a lot of people say, well, I don't want to sell because I don't want to get into that buyer's frenzy. So people were holding on, creating more pressure on the inventory. And in response, the government came out with all of these different changes over the last couple of years. So I sit and like to reflect, who is really the cause for the unaffordability of Vancouver? And is Vancouver really that unaffordable? People are still moving to Vancouver in droves. I mean, there's lots of different, I've been to several different meetings with where the mayors of different cities talk to the realtors, and all of them are having large population projection of growth. So if that's the case, if Vancouver's so unaffordable, why are people still coming here? And if they are coming in here into these regions in this high a pace, well, where are they going to go? They're either going to be buying, which creates pressure again on the demand and supply, or they're going to go into rental properties. So regardless of all these taxes, people are still going to be coming into this area. So again, is the government going to continue to add more taxes and more changes that's going to try to hinder that? Because at the end of the day, to me, you're just saying closed for business, which is not good, because you should be proud of the fact that Vancouver and the Lower Mainland here is a place that people want to go. But again, this is just my 2 cents. Again, manning up on real estate, we're talking about some of the heavier topics of real estate and what it's going to mean to you as investors. So going forward, as we talk about investment real estate, here is what my thought process is for you guys as investors. Regardless of all of these stress tests and foreign buyers taxes and all these other different taxes that the government's laying out, there's still opportunity out there. As the market has slowed down now, it has created the opportunity for you to be able to negotiate contracts. This is huge because we haven't been able to really negotiate. We've been in bidding wars for a long time. So go out there and take advantage of that market and start making those bids. Try to see if you can get a property under contract. It's also a great time for rentals because, again, a lot of the attacks has been on the affordability and they've been trying to slow the market down. But there's not really a lot of changes that's causing the vacancy rate to go up. So the vacancy rate's still extremely low. Tenants are going to be seeing a rise in rents. Now, with the market slowing down, we're going to see those rents start to creep back up to the point where they make sense in a lot of areas for the price that you're paying for properties. So now's the time to start getting out there looking for good rental properties and add them to your portfolio. I can't preach this enough because I did this back when the market was slower or there was still opportunity, and because I locked properties down and I just held on to them, we've gained some serious equity over the last couple of years, and we're still cash flowing. In fact, in some of the cases, we're refinancing and pulling equity now to be able to reinvest into other properties. Now's the time to be locking down. Invest smart. Make sure you're investing for cash flow and and equity, and your guys are going to be able to hedge against any other market change out there. That's kind of my 2 cents on today's podcast. Again, really look at when you read something on the unaffordability and who's to blame, really read it with a grain of salt. I think it's more than just the parties that you see out there. I think government does play a big role in that, and at the end of the day, it does come down to supply and demand. If you guys enjoyed this episode, make sure you guys give me a great rating over on iTunes or any other podcasting station that you guys are listening to me on. I do appreciate it. And if you guys found this an educational podcast, make sure you go out and share it. Let other people know about the Manning Up on Real Estate podcast and get the news out there. The best way you guys can help me grow this is by just sharing it as you enjoy it. If you guys want to get involved in the conversation and have your say, you can always tweet or send me a message on Instagram using the hashtag ManningUpRE. And as well, if you're using the Anchor app to listen to this, you can also leave me a voicemail in which I can answer any of your questions here. If you want more information or want to see some other strategies, tips, tricks, and things like that, you can always go to youtube.com/Cameron Manning and get more information there. We are uploading on a weekly basis on that channel as well. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, so much for listening today. This is the Manning Up on Real Estate podcast, and we will catch you guys in the next 2 weeks.